First, for the motion, Richard Lindzen, please go to the microphone.
Okay, I'd like to thank Intelligence Square, the staff, Bob Rosenkrantz, Michael Lera, and of course our worthy opponents for the opportunity to debate the proposition global warming is not a crisis. Please keep in mind what the proposition is. It is not a debate over whether the Earth has been warming over the past century. The Earth is always warming or cooling, at least a few tenths of a degree. And we're talking about, so far, something on the order of 0.6 of a degree centigrade. We're not even arguing about whether greenhouse gas emissions are contributing at some level to warming. And they most certainly should, though I would suggest it would be very little. Indeed, as far as I can tell, even our opponents do not claim that global warming is a crisis at present. Rather, we are primarily addressing the future. Now, much of the current alarm, I would suggest, is based on ignorance of what is normal for weather and climate. Extreme weather events occur all the time. There is really no evidence of systematic increases, judging from reports from bodies ranging from the National Hurricane Center to the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. In fact, outside the tropics, the theory of such storms and variability says that the variability should decrease in a warmer world. Thus, if this is a matter of crisis for where we live, the world is in a permanent state of crisis and will be less prone to crisis in a warmer world. Sea level has also been a matter of concern, I think largely because it's very telegenic, as opposed to a half degree of temperature. And sea level has been increasing since the end of the last ice age glaciation, with the most rapid change in Greece about 12,000 years ago. In recent centuries, the rate has been relatively uniform, averaged over 10-year periods. It amounts to a couple of millimeters per year. And this is a residual of much larger positive and negative changes locally. Those changes are due to tectonics, and the risk, if you're worried about sea level change from these changes, is larger than it is from warming. The impact of warming on agriculture is not easy to ascertain, but for example, India has warmed in the second half of the 20th century, and agricultural output has increased greatly. The impact on disease seems dubious at best, according to articles in Lancet. Infectious diseases like malaria are not so much a matter of temperature as of poverty and public health, most notably the elimination of DDT. Malaria is still endemic in Siberia and was once so in Michigan. Exposure, I would suggest, to cold is generally found to be both more dangerous and less comfortable. Now, recently the IPCC Summary for Policymaker came out, and it had an iconic claim about man's impact on temperature change. Does this imply crisis? Well, the impact on temperature per unit carbon dioxide actually goes down, not up, with increasing CO2. The role of anthropogenic greenhouse gases is not directly related to the emissions rate or even CO2 levels, which is what the legislation is hitting on, but rather to the impact of these gases on the greenhouse effect. Modelers use double CO2 as a convenient benchmark, and on the basis of current models, it's claimed that this should lead to about 1.5 to 4.5 degrees warming. What is less often noted is in terms of greenhouse forcing, we're already 3/4 of the way to that doubling. And we've only seen 0.6 degrees. And there's no reason to suppose, furthermore, that this is all due to man. Now, this certainly does not support the model forecasts upon which alarm is based. Modelers commonly claim it's still possible that aerosols have canceled much of the greenhouse warming. Unfortunately, the impact of aerosols is considered by the IPCC to be virtually unknown. And indeed, many people consider that canceling the warming involves a larger effect than seems plausible. There have also been claims that warming has been delayed by the ocean. But the results I've mentioned are from coupled models involving the atmosphere and the ocean, and in many of these, the oceans have been tuned to have particularly long delays. Now, I think it's crucial to distinguish between the claim that models can display past behavior from the actual situation, which is that models can be adjusted to display past behavior once that behavior is known. There is no reason to suppose that the adjustment corrected the relevant error. It is worth adding that warming, instead of accelerating, has been essentially absent for about the last 10 years. So the iconic statement is itself not indicative of crisis. And one could, if one had time, explain why the iconic statement itself may very well not be true. The major defense of the statement is modelers cannot think of anything else that gave warming over the last 30 years. But these are the same models that cannot account for the medieval warm period, or for that matter, even do a good job of replicating El Nino. So even the basis for the iconic statement is not particularly meaningful. So crisis is not a product of current observations.
One.
It's not even a product of projections. Now, there is no reason to suppose that anything will cause a threshold to change this assessment. We're still talking about a 2% imbalance, and we're also talking about the impact of CO2 per unit CO2 that decreases. This is not the usual condition for a threshold. Moreover, there are positive reasons to suspect that greenhouse warming is not significant. The real signature of greenhouse warming is not surface temperature, but temperature in the middle of the troposphere, about 5 kilometers. And that is going up even slower than the temperature at the surface. Finally, the underlying present concern is not the greenhouse effect per se. Doubling CO2 by itself only gives you 1 degree warming.
Richard Lindzen, thank you very much for your opening statement. I do have to cut you off there.